Nancy introduces a vital qualification into the way that we think about finitude. And it's a qualification that is already there in the work of other thinkers, but it looms largest in Nancy, and he's developed it most extensively. And it's this. It's that if my existence is defined by my relation to, let's say, my mortality, as we defined finitude earlier, then the important thing to notice about that mortality is that it never actually becomes my possession in any way. I can't appropriate my death as the object of my consciousness or the object of my will. So my death is not something that I can, as it were, do. Now, at that point, this is a distinction between what we might call then finiteness, the state of being limited, as proposed by Sartre then, following Heidegger. So finiteness is the state of being limited, and what Nancy will call finitude, which is to say the relation, my existence being defined by its relation to what then becomes an infinite openness, something which will never arrive. And this is what Nancy calls infinitude then. And this is a good thing. It's important to understand that this relation to, as a term, which is never going to become present, isn't some sort of melancholy structure. This is a good thing because this is an infinite opening. It's an opening in two senses. It's an opening to all the other beings with whom I share that situation. And so this is what then allows Nancy to think, to provide an analysis of community, for example, or what he calls being singular plural. It's also important because it means then that my existence is not something that I can turn into the object of a project in any way. And that links back then to Antelme, and Nancy makes the connection with Antelme in this way in his work on community. That links back to Antelme because what it says is that our existence is something that we must not make into the object of a project in any way. That in that sense, it's not so much that we share our existence as that, as he would put it, we are, as it were, shared out by, or spaced by, distributed by our exposure to this finitude, which we're never going to possess. And what that means crucially then for our being in common, as he puts it, is that we are in common irreducibly. That's the structure of our existence. But the imperative then is not to make that being in common into a substance which we might share. And this is what he calls a fusional or a communal or essentially a fascistic politics. So in terms of a thinking of equality, what that offers us then is, on the basis of an understanding of the structure of our existence, it offers us a way of thinking about equality which refuses to define that equality, again Antelme is important here, which refuses to define that equality on the basis of any kind of shared substance or attribute or possession or identitarian status, anything like that. That equality is a given at the level of our existence, and the important thing then is to attempt to respond to that fact politically precisely by not turning it into the object of a project or anything we might share, but precisely by understanding it as a kind of exorbitant or hyperbolic opening, always ever more to each other and to the world. So I think there's two ways in which we need to think about that. One, and they're both in terms of determinate political action that might be necessary now. The first thing is that for some considerable time, if I can say our, political situation has been defined by the collapse of available positions of, as it were, political subjectivation. So in the name of what might we go about acting politically? Might we develop an egalitarian politics? And the first important thing that the politics of finitude then tells us is that if we are to develop a truly egalitarian politics now, then it can only be, and it needs rightly to be, in the light of the absence of any possible name then that we could give ourselves. Because by definition, yes, our equality is not something that we can share. It's not something that we own as a shared attribute and which we could therefore use, because as soon as we start to think like that, we start to exclude other people. So if we are to practice any kind of truly egalitarian politics, then we have to understand that as a sharing out of ourselves, not of any kind of attribute or quality or capacity. Now, I can give you a precise example of how that might work. If we are, for example, to resist fascistic definitions of community and fascistic definitions of who might have a right to live here or there or anywhere else, we can't do that on the basis of any kind of communitarian declaration, because this is precisely what we're attempting to oppose. So there we have and there are, and I would argue and have argued that specific instances of opposition to that kind of fascistic mobilization have successfully taken place precisely in as much as they're a refusal of any identitarian proposition. They're the affirmation of, as it were, an a priori equality solely at the level of existence, and that then has been successfully proved to be amenable to, as it were, activation in a political sense. And this is something that we've seen in politics in the UK over the last 12 months, perfectly clearly. So that would be one example. On the basis of what can we mobilise? Second example would be in relation to what kinds of threat. What are the challenges for an egalitarian politics now? And it's noticeable, I think, that whilst any form of exploitation is already an exploitation of existence as such, certain defining contemporary forms of exploitation proceed by colonising, as it were, existence as such, as opposed to this or that capacity or this or that quality. So any number of distinctively contemporary forms of oppression or exploitation are characterised. What makes them distinctively contemporary is precisely the fact that it's no longer just, shall we say, my labour power that is being exploited. It's, for example, my body as the site of possible medical experimentation. Yeah? So if I'm renting myself out, if I'm renting out my body in a drugs trial, that's not the same thing as selling my labour power. There's clearly a distinction there, and that distinction is the nakedness with which that exploitation is an exploitation of existence as such, not some specific capacity. And that's why then, it's the second reason, because of the nature of what are the distinctively contemporary challenges for an egalitarian politics, that's the second reason why the politics of finitude can offer us the kind of resource that we might need.